Okay, and we're streaming live. Let's see if we are all ready, set, go, teachers. I wonder if there's anybody on the line yet. Hello, folks. Is anybody there? I'm streaming a little early so that we can make sure you're all set and you're all comfortable and you're not going to lose your chance to ask all of your TEFL questions tonight. It's so great to meet you all. I'd love to hear a little bit about where you are all from and what's happening on your side, what you'd like to know. Hi, folks. Hi, Ross. Hi, Tamara. Where are you joining from? Let me know, folks. David, good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Hi, Jabu. Hi, Jaku. Hi, Emma. Where are you guys from? Let's have a little get to know you. Oh, South Africa. Me too. It's freezing. Jacques, you're definitely a South African. Charisse, where are you joining us from? Let me know your places, folks. Durban, woohoo! Anne, where are you joining from? Alabama, so it's midday over there. What time is it in Alabama? Hi from Cape Town. Goodness me, we have so many friends from around the world. Thanks so much for joining again, everybody. I know some of you were waiting last night. England, the Netherlands, we've got folks from more South African, San Francisco, woohoo! East London, some more South Africans. Firenze, we've got people in Italy. Yeah, it's freezing in South Africa today, people. I'm wearing my warmest socks, my slippers, and under the table, a blanket. Hi from the UK. Oh, so wonderful that you're all joining. We've got 3 more minutes until the rest of our companions join us. So get yourself a cup of tea, get yourself ready, make sure we've got your questions. Hello, Harry from the UK, Hans from Durban, Andrea from England. This is fantastic. I feel like we've got even more people on the call tonight. We're going to be chatting about all kinds of things. I'm going to remind you several times during this streaming that you can download. If you look in the message box there in the title, you should see a link to be able to download the online teaching guide. That's got a heck of a lot of information for you. So you definitely want to download yourself a copy of that. I hear you. It's freezing in South Africa. Hi from Italy. From Port Elizabeth. Ooh, we've got friends from everywhere. Ooh, so apparently the sun is shining in England, which is fantastic news. Enjoy it. It's something rare and something beautiful. When the sun comes out in the UK, it's fantastic. Oh, you've got tea. Good. Texas. I lived in Texas. South Africa. Where else do we have? Canada. What's it like in Canada? I always have this picture that it's snowing in Canada all the time, but I don't necessarily think that's that's the truth. Heather, let us know. Is it chilly that side? More South Africans. Okay, good. Now you're starting with the questions. Great. So we're going to take you in 2 minutes. We're going to start the broadcast officially and welcome everybody. And we're going to go through all kinds of information that you might find helpful. And in between, we're going to be answering your questions. Remember to always go to the itoI. Here, let me put the link. Site to check out the courses. We are in fact going to be offering discounted, even further discounted courses. The courses are already discounted, but tonight I'm going to be giving you a code to use so that you get a further 10% discount this weekend. So by Sunday night, if you want to book your course, and the code is, this is it, Lisa 10. Okay. Hi from Cape Town. Hi Alex, welcome. Hi Katie. South Korea. Hi Kim, welcome. Welcome Ilza. We have so many people on the call. I really hope we get to answer all your questions. Oh, you tried the discount code today. It didn't work. Right, I'm going to pass that on to the team and they will be replying to you. So I'm sure they'll get that up and running. Too much experience, no certificates. Okay, well, we're going to look at all of those questions. We've got 1 more minute to let our friends join us and then we're going to begin. So many things to talk about. We're going to talk about what you need to get qualified. We're going to talk about what resources you can use, what you need to think about, how you can innovate working online. We're going to look at some of the pros and cons of working for an employer as opposed to being freelance. And we're going to begin. Welcome, everybody. My name is Lisa, and I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. I really appreciate that some of you joined last night and were not able to get the full hour of the webinar. We really apologize for that, and I'm so happy that you've joined us again. If this works and if you like it, the webinar feedback format, please put some feedback on our Facebook page, and then we can see if we can organize another webinar for you. I have put the code for your discounted courses. I'm going to put it again just in case some of you haven't seen it. If you go to the itoiTEFL.com site, you will see already discounted courses, and you can get a further discount of 10% with a code that I just put on there until Sunday night. So now's your chance. Welcome, everybody. We've got people on the call from Alabama, from Canada, from Florence, from Durban, from Cape Town. I myself live in the mountains in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and I have been teaching in this field for about 18 years. I did my TEFL in 2002, can you believe it? And one of the things that I've enjoyed the most in the last 10 years is this option to be able to work remotely. So we'll chat a little bit about that later, what it's like, some of the pros and cons of working remotely, how it's different from, in-person lessons. But it means effectively that you can teach anytime, anywhere, with just a laptop. And we're going to talk about what the kind of minimum requirements are to get yourself going. But it does mean that you can meet with people from all over the world and carry on your TEFL career from home. It's such an easy thing to do. There's a few things you've got to kind of come to terms with, and once you have done that, you're A for away. So let's begin. We're going to break it down into a few simple steps so that we can cover those. And at the same time, I'm going to be monitoring. Oh, congratulations. Somebody just got their level 5 certificate 2 hours ago. Congratulations. That's fantastic news. The code for the discount, let me give it to you again. There we go, Lisa 10. Just to let you know that this stream will be posted on the itoiTEFL page on Facebook. So if there are parts of it that you don't get, or if you've only just joined later in the call, don't worry, you'll be able to watch it as many times as you need. There will also be time to answer your questions in between. So let's begin with the first step. The first step is to get qualified. Now, not every employer is going to require that you're qualified, but we do not recommend trying to go ahead without a qualification because, first of all, it limits the access to jobs that you have. You might be able to find something, but if you get a proper qualification, it opens the door to a whole range of possibilities for you. It also means, on a very pragmatic level, that you know what you're doing. I mean, it's quite a thing to lesson plan, design a kind of flow that your students can follow, be able to do corrections. There's lots of things that you need to be able to think about before you can get online and start teaching. So the best options for you, and the wonderful thing about what itoiTEFL offers, is that they offer a range of different packages. So if you go to our website, I'll write it again, itoiTEFL.com, you can have a look at the range of courses. The thing that I recommend in terms of our courses is if you get a package like a level 5 course, they are from 200 to 320 hours. It means that you have access to any possible job. And they also include, those courses include specialist courses like online, one-to-one teaching, business, English, etc. If you decide that you're not 100% sure, or you're not able to book the level 5 course at this stage, or you just want to take a level 3 course, which is also perfectly valid, you can also decide to add on those specialist courses later. The reason we generally recommend the level 5 package is because it just opens your options. But as I say, a TEFL qualification, excuse me, is a great start. What people also generally want to see is that you're a native level speaker. It doesn't mean you have to be mother tongue, but if you have a native level of English and a qualification, then you're good to go. So the next step to think about is, how can you get started? And the first thing you got to think about once you've got your qualification is, where are you going to do these lessons? So you want to choose a space that's uninterrupted, that's got a kind of neutral background. If you're teaching kids, for example, you might want to add some fluffy toys and some props, maybe an alphabet, lots of colors. But if you're teaching, for example, business English or English for adults, you might want to have a more neutral background or a map of the world. So think about your space. Another thing you need to think about is the technology that you're going to need. So I already see a whole lot of questions about whether or not you need to have a degree. Very good question. It really depends on the job. Some jobs, some employers will require that you have a degree, and some don't. If you download the online tutor guide, which is it should be in the title, then you will see a nice table that we've done for you of all of the different possible employers and what they do and don't look for, some of the different platforms that look for teachers, whether or not they want a degree, where they want you to be from. And the reason that they might differentiate between different English speakers, for example, American speaker, American English, British English, people from the UK, people from South Africa, people from Australia, etc. They may have an idea, first of all, of an accent or a particular kind of background that they want. And another thing that they want to know is, for example, South Africans, I'm going to be honest with you, we have challenges in terms of internet. So what you can do, if you are South Africans, I'm talking to all of you, but of course I'm going to also give you some tips if I have them for country-specific places. South Africans tend to have challenges with internet speed. If you want to check your internet speed, and a lot of employers will ask you to do this, this is the link that you can use. Speed test. Congratulations, Rehan, you've also just qualified. Well done. All these people have completed their course. Welcome. So if you live in a country where you don't have to worry about internet, fantastic, you're set to go. If you live in a country where that's a bit of a challenge, there's a few ways around it. The one is that you can have your Wi-Fi system, and then you could also have a backup different service provider. That's what I do. I have two going at every time so that I can always take the best connection. This is also a good idea for South Africans, and I did share this in the brief webinar last night, because it means that if there's no power, you still have a charged up device that can last you for the rest of the day of teaching. Likewise with your laptop. I always advise you to keep your laptop charged so that if there's a power issue, let's say you're in the jungle somewhere and there's no more power, you have enough power in your laptop for the day. So those are some of the tips. In terms of what you need, a laptop is definitely desirable. There are some employers, or if you're teaching freelance, which we'll discuss later, where you can use your phone. But if you think about it, this is a much better way of engaging through your laptop. You've got a camera built in, and if you would like to increase the quality of the visual, you can get a plug-in camera, a webcam, if you really want to, particularly if you're looking at, for example, pronunciation, or you're working with kids that they really have to see your mouth in the pronunciation of the words, you're working with a class of students, etc. But if you're doing classes like this or one-to-ones, it should be absolutely fine to use your inbuilt camera depending on the quality. Likewise with headsets. So I tend to use my inbuilt audio, but if I have a class of a lot of people and it can be a little bit noisy sometimes, you can also plug in these headphones that also have a microphone attached to them. People also use headsets that they use over the ears. It really depends on you. Your laptop might have everything inbuilt that you need, but you can always add on. Okay, so let's take some questions here, and then I'll get on to the next point. So, in terms of all your questions, I see a few questions about upgrading courses, etc. How do you upgrade? How do you add on? You're welcome to go to the itoI site, and there's an option there to contact us, and people will contact you. So you're welcome to ask them all of those sorts of questions. Let's have another look. How do I show my native level of English? Good question. If you're in a place where you're not considered a native level English speaker, you can get a certificate from a language school that says what level you have. In some places, you may be able to show your exam if you've done an IELTS exam, for example. Particular exams that you've taken that show your level of English, those would also be valid. So yeah, talking about, there's also questions here about internet. Somebody asks me about fiber lines in South Africa. Depends which country you're in. Most of Europe, most of the northern United States, etc. So the US, Canada, etc. Asia, your internet speed is very fast. In South Africa, even the fiber lines can be quite slow, which is why I've found the fastest thing is to get one of these, as I said, little dongles. You may have to get a data package, but at least then you know you've got fast internet. There is an option in terms of internet that you could, if you had problems, or let's say you're trekking through the jungle and you have intermittent internet, of course that would become tricky. But in most places you have access to internet, and then what you could do if you found that it wasn't fantastic in the place that you were living in, you could choose to do just audio, for example. I did that for a while and I really liked it in the beginning. This is back in the day. I used to really enjoy the audio only calls, but now I've gotten quite used to the video because I enjoy the interaction between my students and myself. I like to be able to work with a group of people. And these days, people are meeting virtually. We can chat a little bit about that later on in terms of platforms, etc., content, where you're going to get that. But people are becoming more and more used to working virtually. And the expectation these days is more and more that video is included in the call, especially with the advent of COVID that we're all going through around the world. There's a lot of people at home who want to learn, which is why it's a fantastic time for you to get qualified and book your itoI course, because there's a lot of students who are needing to learn. So it's actually a nicer, more interactive way if you can see them. It doesn't mean you can't do audio, but for me, in my career, I prefer to be able to see people and interact like this. So, more questions. How does one apply for online teaching once you're qualified? Good question. Okay, let's say you've got a laptop. Any laptop really will do, as long as it runs well. You've got a stable Wi-Fi or internet connection. If you're in South Africa, you've got a backup. You've got all the audio and the visual that you need. If you have not great quality video on your laptop, you've got a webcam that you plug in, a Logitech or something like that. Now what do you do? Good question. So the second part of my kind of sharing with you is that I want to encourage you to innovate. Okay? The time for working online is upon us. And sometimes it can be a little bit nerve-wracking in the beginning. There can be glitches, as we discovered. You can have everything set from your side, everything ready and prepared, your lessons perfectly prepared, your space set up, your Wi-Fi, your backup ideas for your lesson plan, and there can be glitches. So you have to be innovative, you have to be flexible, and you have to be professional. So the most important thing when you are getting into this world is to practice with the platforms. Some of the platforms that you can use that people are using for lessons is Skype. People still use Skype a lot. People use Zoom. People use Microsoft Teams. Actually, a lot of people use that. People also use Bramble. They use Google Hangouts. They use web rooms. All of those are good. What you'll probably find is that if you're working for an employer as opposed to just working freelance, you'll find that they will have preferred platforms. And for example, some of the language schools that hire teachers, they will set you up with, that's a good question. I'm going to get to you next. They're going to set you up with your own Skype account or your own Zoom account, etc., if needed. Some of the employers actually have their own platforms that you can call through, and they will train you on that. I just saw a really good question saying, what is the predominant age group that people need lessons for? And I would say it's such a wide range. Of course, there's a huge market at the moment for kids, for teaching kids online. And there you have to be really innovative. So you've got a class of, it won't be a huge class if you're doing it online. Let's say you've got 6 students, children, and you've really got to get them engaged. So it's good to have props, it's good to have toys, it's good to have songs, it's good to have a lot of tricks up your sleeve. Another thing to think about when you're teaching kids online is that you've got to change activities fairly often. Little ones, they shouldn't have the same activity for 30 minutes. They can't. They need to switch activities quite often. So that's why I'm saying innovate. If you're teaching adults, for which there's a huge demand as well, to be honest, there's such a big market because the way that the world has gone, English is the language of business around the world. So there's a lot of adults out there who are needing to learn online. How that generally works. So let me talk you through that a little bit because some of you are, I didn't say America, I said the United States. I said the US. Thank you. Yes, there's lots of parts to America. Thanks for acknowledging that. So let's imagine you have a student who needs to learn English so that they are able to talk with their colleagues in other countries, in other parts of the world. Let's say you've got, let's invent somebody for you, Diego. Okay, Diego is from Spain, and he is an intermediate level student, and he needs to know how to answer the phone, write polite emails, book airplane tickets. He needs to know how to do practical things, but he also needs to know how to do professional things. For example, he needs to know how to give a presentation, he needs to know how to negotiate prices, and he needs to know how to present himself professionally in an interview. So let's take the case, for example, that he is your student and he's your freelance student. In other words, you are not working through an employer. It makes a difference because if you're working through an employer, they would generally do an assessment of his level and a needs analysis of what he needs, and they would set you the course as well as most likely content. Content is often included. If you work for an online language school, they will most likely provide you with content. Let's imagine, however, that he is a freelance student of yours. In other words, you are responsible for all the content. You are responsible for managing the times. You are responsible of getting, for getting payments, although in some situations a freelance platform would manage that side of things. We'll chat about that in a minute. So what do? Well, there's so much content out there that you can find. In fact, if you, once again, the discount code is valid until Sunday evening, just so that you know, to answer that question. So if you download the online teaching guide that itoI, we have it in the title of this webinar, it will show you some of the places that you can look for online content. There's a whole list of them. It really is endless. What's really nice for students, particularly if you're working freelance, is if you can use real life material. So for example, you want to use a YouTube clip, you want to use a TED talk and spark conversation around that. You also want to use role play of actual situations. So if you've got people learning online, something that you've got to remember is that the beauty of online learning is it's quite intense. That time is, if it's one-to-one, particularly, for example, that time is just about them and their needs. And they need to leave that session being able to use the thing that the lesson is about. So, some people might say, oh, they want conversation lessons. That's fine. But if that person is there in order to be able to pass an exam or, like Diego's case, negotiate or give a presentation or be able to have an interview in English, and you just have a general conversation, you're not meeting his needs. So what happens in that lesson is that you let's say you open your Skype, let's say you're doing it on Skype, you call, Diego answers, you have the lesson, you can write the corrections in the chat space, you can send him files, you can send him links. If you're discussing, for example, a TED Talk, you want him to watch it beforehand because he may have a 30-minute lesson, maybe a 60-minute lesson, maybe a 45-minute lesson, but the point is the time that you have together is really for practice and production of that language. So, for example, let's say you're preparing him for negotiating, and before you get into the lesson, you've asked him to watch a clip on negotiating. So he's watched it beforehand. Then when the lesson begins, you do a warmer as per your usual TEFL principles, and then you go into the lesson around negotiating. What you would want him to do by the end of the lesson is be able to negotiate. So you would role play backwards and forwards. You might add in some more input. You might do some corrections. But basically, Diego has to leave that lesson with a clearer understanding and experience of being able to negotiate in English. Once you've finished the lesson, you would most likely send some corrections. You might send him some follow-up homework. You might set him something for the next lesson. You might ask him some feedback. For example, are you happy with that? Would you like to work on that some more? And you would take it from there. There's pros and cons to both sides of either working as a freelancer or working with an employer. Some of the pros for working for an employer, especially if you're just starting off, I'm seeing a lot of you here have just qualified or about to qualify. I can see David's worried about his lesson plan. And you have some kind of starting off teachers. It's great to work with an employer where, first of all, they give you guidance, of what they want. They assess the student for you, and they provide content. However, the rates are fairly limited. They might start off at a certain rate, let's say $10, $12 an hour, maybe up to 20, 25 with a bit more, experience. They might also, if you have a group class, offer you more per hour. If, however, you want to work as a freelancer, there are some great platforms to use. I'll put some here in the chat for you. But there was also a whole table on the online teaching guide that you can download, the one that I've been telling you about. There's a whole table of information about what they require, different platforms that you can use, what the benefits are. iTalki is one, Cambly is one, Verbling is one. I'm really enjoying some of these questions. I'm going to get to them in a minute. So let's imagine, for example, that you sign up to one of these platforms. The benefit is that you can set your profile, you can set your rates, you can decide how you want to teach. For example, if you want to take people through exam classes, if you want to offer only business English. Again, remember the second point, innovate. Okay, so if you do that, the cons of that is that you're not guaranteed that your time is going to be full the whole time. So, for example, if you've got an employer, they ask for your availability, they fill up your time with students, oops, you're done. Whereas if you're doing freelance, you're basically building up your own business, which is exciting because it takes a little bit longer, but it means that you can really craft your career. You can craft the way that you teach. You can set your own rates, you can set your own times, etc. But it does take a little bit of time to get up and running. So students would be able to scroll through. It's a bit like an Uber or an Airbnb situation, peer-to-peer. So students will use the platform to scroll through, decide which teacher they want to work with. Teachers can post their profiles, and then you find each other. There might be a small fee that goes to the platform, but essentially it's an agreement between yourself and the student, which is really handy. Okay, so will you be able to qualify? Yes, you can use the discount code. Somebody's asking how long can you use it. You can use the discount code. I'm going to put it again. That gives you a further 10% on the already discounted codes before Sunday night. So please don't lose your chance. We have another question from Betsy. Is it possible or good to work with another teacher to create conversation lessons? Yes, 100%. Something I haven't mentioned yet, and I've already been talking for 25 minutes. One of your biggest resources in the TEFL world, aside from, of course, everything that's online and everything on the itoI website. By the way, when you do an itoI course, you automatically qualify for the Love TEFL website. All the information, the jobs board, let me put that on there. And there's a wealth of information on there. There's wonderful blog posts for specific questions and places like, can I teach without a degree, which I've still got to answer. So the other fantastic resource that you have available to you as a TEFL teacher is other teachers. So that question that I just had about does it work to work with other teachers, 100%. My first 3 years of teaching, I had some wonderful academic directors when I worked. My first place to work was in Italy. And since then, I've worked in many places around the world and most recently online, as I was sharing earlier. But the first few years, I would have to often pop out and pick my fellow teachers' brains, ask for some input to how do I teach present perfect. And, as I got more experience, which happens very quickly, you become comfortable very, very quickly. You get the opportunity to then share your ideas with teachers. It's such a wonderful thing. It's not about, I have that information, you have that information. Teachers just want to help each other. So definitely use that as a resource. I've got another question here. How does payment work? Good question, Millie. Thanks for that question. So if you're working for an employer, as we were just chatting about, they would generally do a payment either into your bank account, directly into your bank account. Yes, even from overseas, it's not a problem. Once a month, usually. Or they might ask you to have an international bank account. So that could be PayPal. What I use for most of my international work is TransferWise. TransferWise is a fantastic borderless bank account, which means because it's borderless, it means that people can pay you in their own currency if their currency is aligned with that bank. So in other words, you could pay me from Germany or you could pay me from the UK, or you could pay me from the US in dollars, for example. The only challenge with TransferWise for South Africans is that I don't know if they would be able to send a card to South Africa. I know that they send, there's a little card that they will send you that you can then draw your cash from. I'm not sure whether they will send that to South African, so you might have to have somebody in the UK, in the US, or in other countries that they do send the bank cards to. But other than that, you could also use PayPal, which you don't even need a card. There's also that other one, Payoneer, is another kind of, it's a similar to PayPal situation. If you are freelancing, there's a range of options there. One is that the platform pays you out, okay? That it's sort of like an Airbnb situation, or that you would sign up, you would have the agreement with your student, and then your student would pay via the platform, and then you would receive it. And again, then you could draw it to PayPal or potentially to your own bank account. Another option is if you have your own, like your whole own platform, your own website, your own marketing, which could be a fantastic idea. If you have the right network and the right kind of support for that, that could be a really good idea. Then you would need to manage payment yourself. So in other words, you need to liaise with your students. You really, in that case, need to think about your cancellation policy. So you don't want people to cancel, less than 24 hours before, because your day is scheduled and you don't want to be, stuck with gaps in your day because somebody hasn't let you know. So generally with employers too, there's a cancellation policy. Less than 24 hours, usually you get paid regardless. But if you're managing payment from students yourself, I recommend that you have a good cancellation policy. I also recommend that you sell packages as opposed to just one-to-one. So you want students to go on a journey with you. You want to be sure that you have enough time to kind of develop their learning. And you also want to be sure that, business-wise, it makes more sense to sell a package. Do you need a written agreement with a student if you freelance? Good question. It really depends on what you set up. So yeah, I would definitely have some kind of, sign up thing that you use. particularly if your students are youngsters. So that's something to think about. If you are working with kids, for example, you most certainly would not use your own social media profile. For example, this webinar on Facebook assumes that you're all kind of over 18. If you're not, I'm assuming that you've got your parents' permission. But if this is regardless through the itoI website, if I were working with kids, I would not give them my personal social media profiles. So that's something to think about. If you are working with youngsters, you need to contract obviously with their parents. You need to not have their personal social media, their Facebook, etc. And a lot of them will want to, but in many countries it's actually against the law to interact with under 18s on social media. Of course, through your professional site, that makes sense. And in fact, even with adults, you want to keep your personal and your, professional social media things separate so that you're teaching on a professional platform. Right, let's have a look at some of the questions. Did it ever happen that I taught and didn't get paid? That's never happened to me, to be honest. In about 18 years of working, I mean, it did happen once that I did some work for a friend or that I volunteered my time. I did a lot of volunteer teaching in my first few years. I worked with adults in South Africa as a volunteer, but it's never happened to me to teach and not get paid. What I recommend if you are concerned about things like that, and this is the next thing we can talk about in terms of jobs, etc. What I would recommend is that you always go and do a bit of a background check on the schools that you work for. If you can't find a really reputable and valid website, check on all the forums. There's lots of TEFL forums that teachers can interact on. There's the Love TEFL. There's also Dave's ESL Cafe is another one. There's a lot of forums where teachers chat about schools, about different places, etc. And you can always put on Facebook, for example, there's endless sites that you can join. You can pop a message on there on those forums and say, has anybody heard of XY school in this country? The TEFL community is quite a communicative community. So if nobody's heard of your school and it's really never been spoken about, it doesn't exist on the internet, nobody has anything to say about it, it's not on Glassdoor, it's not on any of those kind of review sites, then I might be a little bit concerned. I would stick with, especially unless you've got a friend working in a country who loves their school, who thinks it's great, or a friend sister or a friend's brother, and who says they need teachers come and work here, then you've got a direct connection with the place. But other than that, you want to really check out the schools that you work with. If you do that, and it's vetted by other teachers, you should be absolutely fine. I personally have never had a problem. That's not to say there aren't problems out there, particularly, with remote situations, etc. There's not a lot of recourse to that. But as I say, if you check out your school that you're working with, look for some reviews, ask if possible to speak with other teachers so that you can get yourself prepared, then you should be absolutely fine. What I used to do in the beginning of my career is just to get as much experience as possible. So, yes, I have a question here. Will the lessons be given to me to teach? It depends. So, thank you for that. I think that's from Tavrin. It depends on which school you work with. If you work for an employer, you would definitely get a syllabus to work with and content to work with. If you work for yourself, you would need to come up with your own material, of which there's so much out there. And as I say, those of you who have just joined us, welcome. We are going to be streaming this. You will be able to get the link for this video so that you can watch the rest of it. And you will be able to download. You'll see if you have a look on the subject line here, there's a link to our online teaching guide. If you download that, there's a whole list of teaching resources. There's also a whole list of the sites that you can look at for freelancing. So some of them are popped in the chat already. And if you also, there's a question here about internships. Yes, what I did in the beginning of my career is I got as much experience as possible. There are internships. If you look on the Love TEFL, I'm going to write it again, Love TEFL jobs board, they sometimes offer internships. For example, in South Africa, I know that they have some. Of course, not during this time. But the thing that you need to do is just get teaching. Go and look at the jobs boards. Have a look. You can search by keyword. So if you go to the jobs board, you can search online, for example. You can also search by country later on once the world opens up. But particularly for online jobs, there's such an increasing demand for people to learn from home. So there's a lot out there. And have a look from job to job what they require. You do not necessarily need to have a degree. I see some people are asking, yeah, and it doesn't have to be any if people ask you for a degree, so for example, you click on a job, what are the requirements? Well, you need a TEFL qualification. As I explained earlier on this video, sometimes they have specifications for which country the person comes from. That can happen. Have a look at what applies to you. Some of them will ask for a degree and some of them will not. If they ask for a degree, as per the question, it doesn't necessarily have to be any specific degree. It doesn't have to be. So some of the times it's a country requirement to have a degree for a job. So for example, aside from online teaching, if you're going to travel to a certain place, they might have a visa requirement that you have a degree in order to teach. But for the online format, it's really employer to employer. There is a list of employers that hire TEFL qualified native level teachers with no degree. You don't need it. You will often receive, with employers, you will often receive training. So that will be your first step in getting to terms with what it's like to teach online, how the platforms work. My recommendation is you just try to get as much experience as possible. Even practice with your friends, practice with the platforms. That's how you get to be comfortable with working online. Aside from teaching, there's this whole aspect of getting to know what it's like to work online. For example, how do you correct people? So you correct people by putting it in the chat space. Some of the platforms that you will work with and some of the, for example, Zoom, some of them have an interactive whiteboard that you'll get once you're getting super tech. It's so easy and so quick for you to get these skills going. And once you can see how to work on an interactive whiteboard, you can also use that. So it's almost like you're in the classroom, but there you are online and there you are working with your student. So where can you look for online teaching jobs? As I said, look at the Love TEFL jobs board. You can do keyword searches and all the jobs that are available will come out. Somebody's asking me, it's a very good question, is it difficult to get an online job at age 62? So the nice thing about teaching online is that there is not really an age limitation. If you're looking for in-person jobs, okay, let's say, for example, at a summer school where you got to run around and you got to do sports, etc., then there might be that consideration of whether it would be appropriate for a person age 60 to teach. But online, depending on the employer, of course, you might find that there's an employer that has an idea of what they want and you don't fit it. It may not be to do with age. It may be to do with my accent. It may be to do with kind of background. They want somebody with a business background, for example. But those are specific employers. In general, people who have worked in other fields and come to TEFL, of which there are many, many, many people. I've met people from all walks of life that have started doing TEFL teaching at all ages. You generally need to be over 18, okay? But basically, when you come to TEFL with background experience, that can really work in your favor. So this is the wonderful thing about online teaching. You're not limited in any way, if that makes sense. So I'm getting a question from Elzan about South African bank accounts and PayPal. Yeah, so you'd have to check. PayPal does allow you to withdraw to your bank account, and I think you can use an FNB bank account. Yeah, you do need to you do need to pay taxes. So you need to figure that out in whatever country that you live in. We recommend that you, of course, check out what the process is for if you're a freelancer to pay your taxes. You do need to still do that. You would be considered, your own business, and you would need to do your tax every year. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, goodness me. Somebody's asking me about discount codes and what percentage it ends up from the total price. Sorry, my maths is not great, but I'll tell you that the current courses on itoI, go across and have a look, are already discounted, and plus with the code, I'll write it one more time, you will get a further 10% discount if you sign up before Sunday night. That is this Sunday night. Right, there we go, you've got the code. So, my dear Santino, do I need a TEFL certificate if I have a teaching degree and I have been teaching English at high school for 13 years? Okay, Santino. So, the answer to that is we call people who are qualified teachers teachers. That's what I've always called you, teachers, because you have a teaching degree and you have experience, which is wonderful. That stands you in great stead. It really does. I mean, of course, we're talking about what you do and don't need. In fact, you don't need very much to start teaching online, but the more experience you have, the better. Most employers, however, would prefer you to have a TEFL qualification. The reason is because because um, the fact is that the TEFL methodology is very different from teacher teaching, if that makes sense. So as a TEFL teacher, you're a facilitator. I always liken it to a gym instructor, okay? And I'm not sure, depending on what kind of English you've been teaching, Santino, but the thing is that you don't actually want to tell your students. You want to get it from them, and you'll see that in your course. Once you do your course, it's one of the main principles of TEFL teaching. You're the gym instructor and they've got to do the exercise. So that's the methodology. You want to get it from them. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I've ever met a gym instructor who's not pretty sporty. Okay? And it's the same with teaching English. I can speak English. I'm not the one who needs to practice. They need to practice. So you need to get your students, and it's the same with online teaching. You need to think about ways that they can come to life with the content. So you need to activate your students to practice, which means that it's a slightly different methodology from kind of traditional teaching. And that's what's so exciting about it, and that's what's so fun about it. And that's why you should all sign up for the course and become TEFL teachers, because it gives you the opportunity to get people to use skills that they haven't used before, or that they've used before and forgotten, or they haven't actually put into practice. So that's why employers prefer you to have a qualification with TEFL. Even if you're already a teacher, it's much better for you, and it does open the possibility of jobs. Right, let's see what some other questions are, and then I also want to talk a little bit about what's next in terms of once you've been teaching for a while, what are some of your options? So let's have a little squiz at some of your questions. Let's have a look. Some more questions. Yes. Will there be a recording of this? There absolutely will. There will be a recording of this webinar on the itoI page. You're welcome to watch it afterwards with absolute pleasure. It will be posted almost directly afterwards. I think a few seconds after we finish this webinar, it will be available on the itoI page, Shanae. So go ahead and look back. It's a lot of information. I know that I'm really like loading you up with information, but hopefully if you give the feedback that you're enjoying it and that you'd like to hear more, perhaps we can organize some more webinars in the future. So what is next? You've been teaching for a little while, you're getting confident, your student base is growing. What are some of the other areas that you can branch out into? And again, if you look through the online teaching guide, there's some tips on this. You could get into a niche, and that's very handy, and that's where you can also up your earnings. If you get into a niche like, for example, business English or medical English if you have a medical background, or if you want to specialize, for example, in exam preparation, that's a nice area that you can kind of grow into. Another area which is wonderful, which is what I really enjoy, is writing content and lesson plans, designing courses and webinars and this kind of thing. And if you can get into that kind of thing, then that's also a very real possibility for doing remotely. There's a big need for content. There's a big need for, online courses, etc. So that's a nice way that you can grow your skills later down the line. Something else that could really improve your teaching network is also a good amount of marketing savvy. So if you're working for yourself as a freelancer, I would definitely get some tips and some input from specialists on that so that you can get marketing yourself. Good question. We have a question which I'm going to ask the itoI team to answer, which is, which time zone deadline is midnight on Sunday for the discount code? I will ask my colleagues to reply to you at some point about this. What can you do? Lunga wants to know, what can I do in order to be my own boss with TEFL? Good question. So if you want to really do things for yourself, first of all, you need to get some experience, of course, because there's nothing like experience. If you are your own boss, it means that you have to provide all your own content. You have to manage that you're assessing your students' level correctly. You're needing to make sure, for example, that the content is appropriate. You're designing, the lesson program. You're checking if they're happy. You're checking their progress. So first of all, to be your own boss in TEFL, I would definitely get experience and qualification, of course. Then you can decide whether you want to work for some of the platforms that we talked about earlier, which are also all outlined in the guide that you can download. But what I would recommend is either that you set up your own website, get yourself completely, independent, but then you need to have a network. Another thing that a lot of people are doing these days is getting set up on Facebook and teaching on Facebook through this live function. And the other option to get set up as your own boss in TEFL is, of course, to sign up to one of those platforms we talked about, Verbling or italki or Cambly or one of those, where the platform exists, the students are already looking on the platform, and you set yourself up with a profile. And again, to answer your question, what really makes you stand out from somebody else is if you have a particular niche. For example, you teach kids, you teach, for example, teenagers, or you teach business English, or you teach exam prep, or you teach anybody who needs to learn, anybody whatsoever. We had a question a little bit earlier about, how difficult is it to teach somebody who doesn't have any English? That's exactly what you learn in the TEFL course. So the itoiTEFL courses, go over to the itoI site. I'm going to put the link in again for those of you who only joined us more recently. And by the way, the courses are already discounted, and they're going to go to a further 10% discount before Sunday if you use this code, before Sunday night. So if you, sorry, I just want to double check the answer to that. Kids, okay. Yeah, so what you learn in the methodology, I was explaining a little bit earlier, and if you haven't seen the whole webinar, you're welcome to go back and look at all the information. The stream will be available on the itoI page. If you're working with beginners, you get given the methodology for it. Just like I was saying earlier, you need to get everything from your students. You also learn how to work with students from absolute beginners upwards. You don't actually need to have their language in order to be able to teach them. That's how you learn. So that's one of the principles, is that you only engage in English. Once you've done the course, it will make a lot more sense. But beginners, just to give you a kind of overview, beginners, you will start with repetition, you will start with the basics, you will build vocabulary builds where you kind of through the context. So again, you're doing everything in context, you're doing things with props, you're doing things with what we call realia, which is real objects. So if you're teaching with water, you would actually have the water in your hand. And there's a methodology that makes it completely possible, engaging, fun, and interactive on all levels, which is why we recommend that you get a TEFL qualification as opposed to just trying to teach out of the blue. Okay, I'm going to take one more questions. Do many language schools do routine checks on their staff to ensure that they are meeting the standards of the school and watch the videos of their teaching staff? Absolutely. Good question, Dee. So if you're working for an employer, let's say a language school, an online language school, they would have a training process that you would go through where you get to know the platform, you get to know the content, you get to know what is expected of you, and you would also have a mentor or an academic director that you could ask questions, from. You would also have colleagues, hopefully, that you could engage with. You would also, most language schools should have a professional development program where you can have workshops and unpack challenges or get to know new technologies or get training on specific things like error correction is always a classic. And if you have that kind of language school, a reputable, accredited language school, part of their standards should be quality control. And absolutely, you would be observed. You would either have to send a recording or they would be on the line. There's ways that they work around that, but they would absolutely, it's part of your professional development that you get observed. And part of your teacher training is to be observed. And that's part of, we're going to have new courses. We're going to have new free resources. We're going to have exciting things that you can keep looking at our itoI website, because we're going to have a lot of offerings for you. And part of the kind of learning process is to be observed and to get feedback. So if you're observed, remember, it's not so that they can criticize you, it's that so that they can help you and they can give you tips, they can let you know where you're going wrong, they can let you know where you're going right. Because as a new teacher, and even as a very experienced teacher, I often observe teachers, and I'm very happy to be observed because that's also how we learn from each other. Feedback is one of the most important parts of teaching growth, and it also gives you a sense of, as I say, where you're going right, where you're going wrong, the parameters of that. So yes, very good question. You would be observed at some point. Some schools have it more often than others. What would also be wonderful is and maybe if they don't offer this, you can always request it. Of course, if it's a one-to-one, can be a little bit tricky, but to be able to observe other teachers, because as I say, one of the biggest resources in the whole world of teaching is other teachers. Most teachers are very happy to share. And if you have that's the thing about working in a kind of collective. And if you don't work in a language school, an online language school, if you're working freelance, join the forums available. Sign up to, sites or on Facebook pages where you can connect with other teachers, online teaching forums, and chat with other teachers, share ideas, ask questions. And yeah, it's definitely a good part of your growth. So I think that's all we have time for this evening. It's been absolutely wonderful to spend time with you. Please do give us your feedback on the itoI page. Let us know if you'd like to see some more webinars. There's so many things we can talk about. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to share with you, to hear your questions, to enjoy a webinar with people from all over the world. I wish you a wonderful evening. Don't forget to go to the itoI website. Using the code Lisa10, you will be able to receive a 10% discount on all the courses until Sunday night. Please give us your feedback. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for those of you who joined last night and tonight. And I really look forward to talking with you again. Take care, everybody, and happy teaching. Oh, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Colleen. Oh, such a pleasure. Let's do it again soon. Ciao.